All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Alison and I are very pleased to be here to tell you about some of our newest interface design components and capabilities and tools in the latest release of Appian. Just in a matter of introduction, I am responsible for user experience in the Appian product, and Alison is the product manager focused on our interface designer experience. So first, a little story. I still remember when my dad gave me my first film SLR camera. This was a long time ago. I was really excited about it, and it started a lifelong interest in photography for me. I took classes, I read books, I tried to learn all the science behind photography so that I could mimic the style of photos that I most admired. And if any of you are into the photography hobby, then you wouldn't be surprised that I quickly developed a severe case of GAS, and that's not a embarrassing digestive issue. It stands for gear acquisition syndrome. And that's this disorder that leads photographers to endlessly buy new camera bodies and lenses and accessories. So one day I picked up a old Polaroid instant camera, and it was actually really refreshing to have that simplicity. So I could just quickly snap pictures like this one of my cat Kyle, and I didn't have to think about which camera to use, which lens to use. It was really actually quite liberating. But I didn't really stick with using the point and shoot cameras because I would often want to create a particular effect, and I would be frustrated that I wouldn't have the control over the output that I wanted. So that kind of trade-off between control and ease is probably less familiar to people who are doing photography these days, mostly because of the power of smartphones. You can take advantage of software that takes much of the complexity out of achieving creative results. So for example, it used to be that if I wanted to blur the background of a picture, I would have to understand all the science. I have to understand the relationship between aperture, focal length, subject distance. Now I just tell my phone what I want it to do, and it gives me the result that I asked for. And the point of that story is that we created SAIL technology to try to provide that same appeal. We want our customers to be able to just describe to us how they want their application UIs to behave, and then Appian does the heavy lifting. We make everything work across all of your users' devices. And we know that our customers don't want to rely on a large team of software engineers to build and maintain their apps. SAIL lets you very quickly enhance your tools, build new tools, without having to wait on back-end developers and web developers and mobile developers. However, in exchange for that rapid low-code development experience, up to now you've been limited to pretty simple layouts and pretty basic components. And these are great for building out like simple BPM forms, but we know that many of you want to build much more elaborate user experiences on top of SAIL, and that's what we're here to talk about. You've told us that you want more modern component styling, you want greater screen layout flexibility, you want to build apps more quickly with even less code, and you want more design guidance to build better user experiences. So we've been really hard at work on the next release of Appian, and we want to tell you about many of the new features in it. These features are going to let you build beautiful, richer UIs, and the new capabilities are going to give you greater control over page layout than ever before. We've also made common tasks much easier in the interface designer, and that's going to make app development even faster. So first, I want to show you some of the new capabilities that will help you build Appian UIs that have greater visual impact than before. So many of you are already familiar with the 17.1 release that came out earlier in the year. And what we did then was unveiled SAIL components for the web that had been rebuilt from the ground up. And these featured new styles, typography, and so forth, just to give everything a more modern look. And all of these existing SAIL UIs that you might have as a customer, they're automatically upgraded without any extra effort. At the same time, we also made our web interfaces responsive on mobile devices so that users who haven't installed the native iOS or Android apps can still have a great experience on their phones and tablets. We also introduced a refined color scheme configuration to let you express your company's brands through your Appian UIs. With the upcoming 17.2 release, I'm really excited to show you even more features that will allow you to build UIs with an unprecedented level of sophistication. Rich and dense screens like this one will now be available to your users, and you'll create them using the same SAIL technology that you already know. The first new SAIL feature that I want to talk about, and we heard about earlier in the day, is the billboard component. This allows you to show information on your dashboards overlaid on top of a decorative photo, a video, or a background color. Just like any other SAIL component, employing the billboard is just a matter of setting the configurations that you'd like. So, for example, here we have a short height set on the billboard, and we've added a background photo to it. We can change it to a tall height, a medium height. In addition to the dark overlay style that you saw in the earlier examples, you can switch to a light overlay if that works better for the photo, or even get rid of the background color entirely for the overlay if your content is going to have enough contrast against the background. It's all up to you. Same thing for the positioning of the overlay. You can adjust it vertically. You can switch it to a column layout instead of a bar layout if that looks better. Move that left and right. Change the width of it, just like any of the other SAIL components. So you just tell us the configurations, and then you can immediately see the feedback about what it's going to look like on screen. So I've talked a bit about how our modernized component library and color customization tools come together to allow you to build more beautiful SAIL UIs. Next topic is how we've made SAIL more powerful by giving you much greater control over how your pages look. One topic of feedback that we keep hearing about is that you want to pack more information onto your screens and make better use of wide displays. Not everyone is on a small mobile device. Not everyone is on a small laptop screen. So the first thing we did back in 17.1 is we removed the left navigation bar for record lists and we moved filters to the top of the page. And that gives you more space for your record details on your lists. At the same time, we move record view controls to the top of the page so that when you're looking at the details of each record, you also have more horizontal space for your content. But the big change is a really big leap in terms of screen density and layout control. That's coming in 17.2. You'll be able to pack far more information onto a page than ever before. So let me break this example down into the component enhancements. So first thing is when you're configuring a page on a site, you can now choose a page width. In addition to the standard width, which is the one that we've had thus far, you can specify a wide page, like this example here. When you do that on a typical screen, that's going to allow the page contents to stretch from edge to edge. So you won't have a margin around. You'll be using all the space on the screen. If you have a really high horizontal resolution display, then there will still be a margin, but you'll be using much more of the screen space than in the current layout. In addition to wide and standard, there's also a narrow page width. This makes sense often for simpler forms, things that look good in a single column or two columns. And speaking of columns, we have removed the two-column limit that we previously had on our SAIL UIs. Now you can arrange your page content into as many columns as you'd like. Here, within one page, we see a mix of a 3-column layout at the top and then a 4-column layout at the bottom. The bottom example also shows how the billboard doesn't only make sense at the top of the page. Here, we're using the billboard to show essentially 4 cards laid out within the content of the dashboard. Generally taking questions at the end, but if you don't mind holding.
I was just wondering if columns could be nested inside of other columns.
Yes, there's some degree of nesting of columns that would be possible. Thanks for the question, Jason. So in addition to columns, I just wanted to give you a heads up that one of the things that we're working on for later in the year is a corresponding side-by-side layout component. And that within each of your columns on a page is going to give you even finer grain control over the layout of various components that are going to share one row on a page. So one example would be if you want a first name, middle initial, last name, triplet of fields sharing one row on a form, you can now arrange how wide those are. Or if you want to show a user's photo next to their information, you can lay that out so that everything is arranged, not necessarily in terms of evenly sized columns, but the way that you want the distribution to be. Next, for the rich text component, we've added 2 larger sizes. And this allows you to show information of varying levels of importance. We show this in the demo example here for the information about this home. There's a large size and medium size both applied in the content that's shown in the overlay for the billboard. Speaking of rich text, we've also added positive and negative styles in addition to our existing ones for bolding, underlining, italicizing, etc. And that allows you to use color to highlight the meaning of certain data values in your UIs. For our button component, we've added two new sizes, small and large. And we've also added two more styles. The secondary and link styles, combined with the current styles, give you more options for differentiating button prominence on your forms. So like this example here, the go back button and the cancel button, you might not want those to be quite as prominent as the next or a submit button. And now you can choose amongst all those styles and express the relative prominence of the buttons on the form. For some of these new capabilities, for the secondary style and the small size, one place where we recommend using them is for inline buttons. So for example, you might have a series of buttons that are acting like a toolbar for a grid, or just other controls that are not at the bottom for submission of the form. So it's good to use secondary and small size for those so that they don't compete for attention with the submit buttons at the bottom of the form. Another notable thing about the small button size is that its height matches up with the height of standard inputs like text boxes and numeric inputs. So that's good for aligning the two next to each other. Last but not least, we have added a multiple file upload component along with an improved drag and drop experience. So it'll be much quicker for users. We know that's a popular one. It'll be much quicker for users to just add many attachments to a form and so forth, and do so either by selecting it from the file browser or just dragging a bunch of them straight onto the component. So all of these new capabilities I've talked about are going to be available in 17.2 for users of our Appian web interface. And that includes users of the mobile device who are logging in via a web browser. But simultaneously, we're currently working on a ground-up modernization of our native mobile apps for iOS and Android. And while that effort proceeds, there's going to be some temporary differences in how some of these new features work while they catch up. So the billboard component is not going to work on mobile just yet if you're using the native clients. But the page widths, multiple columns, those work seamlessly because the mobile clients will continue to stack the columns to fit within their screens. The new button and rich text styles will be ignored on mobile apps, so they'll keep working. You'll still see the information, you'll still have the buttons, but they'll just revert to their standard styling instead of using the different sizes, the colors, and so forth. Finally, the multiple file upload component, that's going to completely work on the native mobile clients. So to summarize the more powerful SAIL features, you can now fill your user screens with wide page layouts while increasing density by using multiple columns. You can use rich text sizes and styles to control how your data is represented, and you can use button configurations to differentiate your controls. Finally, the multiple file upload component will let your users attach documents in bulk to your forms. Hand it off to Alison now to talk about the design experience improvements.
Great. Thanks, Charles. Yeah, so as Charles mentioned, now that you know all about the great new SAIL features that you can use to build these beautiful interfaces, we're talking about what the actual build experience will be like. So we've heard a lot of feedback that people want an easier way to connect interfaces and process models. So we've really worked to streamline that experience for you. So as always, if you have an existing interface that you want to use as an application action or a report, you can use the Save As feature in the Interface Designer. So when saving as an application action, this will automatically create a new process model for you that uses that interface, and it'll add an action to your application. So you can see here, this process model not only has variables for each of the inputs you had defined in your interface, it also automatically maps them for you. In Appian 17.1, we provided this new feature in the process modeler that allows you to easily connect interfaces and process models and map your interface inputs to process variables. But this feature isn't just available when you save an interface as an action. This is actually available throughout all the nodes in the process modeler. So say I want to add a new user input task to my process model. In 17.2, I can simply drag a node right onto an existing connection, and it'll be connected for me automatically. This is one of many improvements we've made to the process modeler, in addition to making it available cross-browser. You can see I'm doing this in Chrome. I guess you don't see the bar, but. So first, I'll go ahead and add an input to my node that I'll then use on my interface. So when I switch over to the Forms tab, you'll see I now have an interface picker that I can use to select an existing interface, or I have the option to create a new interface directly from here. Now, by default, these new interfaces will have an input created for them for each of the ones that you've already defined in your node. But you can manage that list in the grid at the bottom there. OK, so once I've created my interface, it's also really easy for me to open up that interface to edit it in the Interface Designer. So I can flow back and forth between my process model and my interface really easily. So you can see we created that that interface from the process model, and it automatically had that node input there for me that I had already configured. And my interface was automatically added to my application for me, so it's already in the right place. So it's really easy to create new interfaces, but it's also really easy to connect to any interface you might already have existing. So in that example, I created a node input first and then created my interface. But I can also do it the other way around. So I can go and search for an existing interface. And once I find it, it'll ask me if I want to import those inputs from my interface into the process modeler. So in this instance, I only had one input. But you can imagine if my interface had a lot of data that it would be passing back and forth to the process, this could save me a lot of time and a lot of duplicate effort. OK, so now that you know how easy it is to design process forms and connect them up, we'll talk about the actual Interface Designer improvements. So one design pattern that we see all the time, it's really common, is conditional display for components. In 17.2, we've made it really easy to define those conditions under which a particular component can be displayed. So no more complex if statements to say you should show or hide this component under these circumstances. Instead, each component has a new visibility parameter where you can set those conditions. So in this example, I've actually created an entire wizard by showing and hiding different sections in my form based on what page of the wizard I'm currently viewing. So if I go to one of these sections, I can see that the visibility is configured to only show when I'm on one of the pages in the wizard, as you can see here. So I didn't have to have an if statement for that. It's just right on my component configuration. Now, this configuration is available on all interface elements. So that's layouts, components, and even component configurations like grid columns or chart series or even validation messages. So I can use it all throughout my interface. Here, I've set up a list of components to only show when the property type is not equal to land. So just that simple. In my last example, I've configured the Go Back button to not show on the first page of the wizard. So you can see it gets hidden there when I go back to the first page. But if I decide that maybe I always wanted that button to show up, then I can simply just switch it to the Always Show option, and it'll be there all the time. So this should really make it a lot easier for you to add dynamic behavior to your interfaces with just this really easy point-and-click interface. So another thing that we wanted to make it easier to do is switching the type of components. In this example, I've got my property type, which is being configured using a radio button. But say I wanted it to be a drop-down, see what it looked like as that instead. So now I have the option to convert between different types of components, and it will preserve all of my configurations. So here I switched it over to a drop-down, and it kept everything that I've already configured, so I don't have to redo anything. And of course, if I change my mind, I can switch it right back to a radio button, and it will remember all of my previous configurations, such as the fact that I was using a compact layout instead of the default stacked one. This can also be really useful when you accidentally choose the wrong type of component, and you actually just need to switch it to the right thing. So here, I really should have used a decimal instead of an integer, and it's really easy to just switch that over. So this feature is available across all kinds of different component types. And basically anything that has a compatible set of components where it makes sense to switch between them, you'll see this feature. We've also made it a lot easier to navigate through your interface definition. So if you're using the live view, you can click on any part of that component to view its configurations. So no more hunting around for exactly the right spot to click. We've also given you really easy access to all of the columns and layouts that this component is contained within, so that I can easily go up and reorder components or add a new component to my list of components. Finally, we've added a keyboard shortcut, which you probably can't see in the video because you don't have my keyboard there. But that makes it really easy to get from whatever you're currently looking at to the layout that it's inside of. So all of these basically just make it a lot easier to get around your interface and to make changes. OK, so another common design pattern that we see is dynamically generating a list of components. But this has always been a really difficult design pattern for a lot of reasons. In Appian 17.2, we're providing a new function called forEach, which you can use to dynamically generate the list of components. So like in this example, I'm using it to create that list of rows that shows up in my grid. Now, this forEach function is going to replace both apply and apply components. And if any of you have used apply components before, I'm happy to tell you that forEach is significantly easier in its design experience. First, there's no need for separate rules. You don't have to create a separate expression rule or interface in order to iterate over it. You can simply define your entire expression in line. Next, there's no need for deferred inputs. forEach has its own set of special function variables that allow you to, or that give you access to the particular item you're iterating over, as well as the index and other metadata. You can now also iterate directly over your array, so you don't have to iterate over the indices anymore. And finally, forEach manages all of your local state for you, so you don't have to use the array variable anymore. So all of that comes together to provide a much simpler design experience for dynamically generating components. So we're really excited to introduce forEach to you for the future. And last but not least, we've added a bunch of enhancements to the expression editor to really help make you a bit more efficient. So first is that we've made suggestions that show up as you type significantly faster. So you no longer have to wait for suggestions to come back as you're searching for something. It's much more responsive. We've also made it so that the live view in the Interface Designer reevaluates less often. So especially if you're editing a really large, complex interface that takes a while to evaluate, this should really help improve your performance. We've also added a bunch of keyboard shortcuts to the expression editor to help you be more efficient as you type in the expression editor. The most common of those will show up in a toolbar at the top of each expression editor. And that'll be things like find and replace, commenting, formatting, indenting, stuff like that. We've also added, though, a help tooltip to show you other types of keyboard shortcuts that you might find useful. And if you still can't find what you're looking for in that list, we've also provided a link to the documentation here in the top of that tooltip. So you can actually see the full list of all the keyboard shortcuts that we use. Now, this isn't just available in the Interface Designer, by the way. This is in all expression editors across all the modern designers. So you can use these everywhere. And then lastly, we added some new syntax highlighting to make it a lot easier to read through your expression and find what you're looking for. So while all of those features make it really easy for you to build interfaces, we also wanted to make it easy for you to make the right design decisions. As Charles described, we're adding a lot of flexibility and power with all of these new SAIL components. And we want to make it really easy for you to know what to do, how to use those new capabilities. So the Interface Designer is going to have a lot more templates that will actually help you build beautiful interfaces like the one we've already showed you. We're also going to add some functional templates to this so that we can cover some common design patterns such as wizards or even master detail layouts. Finally, we're also going to have a bunch of information in the documentation to help you design the most common UX patterns. So we'll have new best practice topics that you can find in the documentation when 17.2 is released. So to summarize, the process modeler has a new feature that makes it really easy to connect interfaces and process models when designing your forms. There's a new configuration to set conditional display for all components. It's really easy to change the type of your component using the point-and-click interface in the design view. The new for each function makes it easier than ever to dynamically generate a list of components. The expression editor has a bunch of improvements to help you become more productive, including better performance, keyboard shortcuts, and syntax highlighting. And we've added a bunch of templates and design guidance in the documentation to help you make really good design decisions. So we've told you all about how in 17.2 you can build rich, beautiful interfaces. You have much more flexibility to build the UIs that you want in terms of layout. And we've made the design experience significantly easier to help make you more productive and efficient. So now all that's left is for you to try it out yourself. We have a bunch of demo stations throughout the conference, especially one that's dedicated to these topics, that you should just go, try out the new features, let us know what you think, ask any questions that you have there. We also, obviously, recommend that you download 17.2 when it's available on June 2nd. And at the same time, be sure to review the documentation for all of the new best practice topics that we'll be adding to help you design those good UX patterns. And as always, be sure to stay on the latest version of Appian. Over the next year, we're going to be really improving the list of components that we have and all of their capabilities, as well as improving the design experience. So it's always best to stay up to date. Oops. So from all of us here at Appian, we've worked really hard to bring you 17.2, so thank you very much for coming to our presentation and letting us tell you all about what we worked so hard to bring you. And now, right before I open it up for questions, I'm actually going to introduce Rachel Reiter. She's the product owner for the SAIL UI team, who was one of the main teams that was involved in this modern UI effort. So she's going to be helping us answer questions on any of the new SAIL capabilities, anything like that. Any questions? Sure, Jason.
For the document uploads, is there going to be any way to limit the file types that can be uploaded or to detect any data within the same interface about that document that was just uploaded, such as the title or anything like
Great question, Jason. In case anyone didn't hear, will it be possible to validate what types of files are uploaded in the new file upload component? So as you know, the new version isn't coming out until June 2nd, and as we speak, the team is trying to get far enough along to add that feature. So we do want to. If it isn't in 17.2, it would be soon after.
And also then, can you pull back any properties on that document before the form is submitted?
Before the intention is to expose the name, the size, and the extension.
In your new versions, are you guys planning to have more capabilities for the debugging where we can just put a breakpoint and see what is happening, rather than going to the process designer and find out what is happening? That's really
Yeah, okay, so the question was, are we planning on adding any more tools to help you debug interfaces, processes, stuff like that? So it's definitely something that we're always looking to improve in terms of how do we make it much easier for people to figure out what kind of problems they're having and get there quickly, be able to solve those problems. It's something that we're continually improving. So you'll see incremental improvement in every release, essentially. But as for specific debugging features, we don't have anything really on the plan for the immediate future. There won't be anything in 17.2 for that. But yeah, it's definitely a problem that we know that there is, and we really want to help make people efficient. So. Yes.
Yeah, I've got two questions. So for the for each, you said that it's kind of replacing apply and apply components. Is apply and apply components staying in as functions that we can use? And is there any time that you guys might be taking that out and might switch this stuff to for each instead of apply?
Sure, that's a great question. So the question was, since for each is intended to replace apply and apply components, will those ever be removed? Do we need to, change all of your expressions to not use those, that kind of a thing. So we're not planning on removing apply or apply components. They will be deprecated in the sense that we definitely encourage you to use for each, but they're not going away or anything like that. So any interfaces or expressions that you have that use those functions will continue to work, and there's no like immediate need for you to switch over on those. And we don't have any plans to remove that really ever. However, as you go forward, for each has a lot of benefits, and it makes things a lot easier. So I would definitely encourage, like for any new development that you have, use for each. It's definitely better for a lot of reasons, but there's like no pressing need to go back and update anything that you already have existing.
And the last question is, I haven't looked at 4-H, this is the first time I've seen it, but how similar is that to kind of like for loop, if any similarity between it?
Okay, so the question was how similar is for each to a for loop? It's reasonably similar. I mean, basically you just define the expression that you want to iterate over and tell it what to iterate over. You don't get like there's no like escape thing or anything like that. But you provide a list. It's similar to apply in the sense that you tell it what list you're going to iterate over, and then you just define that list in line. And so, yeah, it's just a lot easier than the functions that we have existing. So, Jason.
Second, on the subject of debugging, will there be any ability at some point in the future to see the contents of local variables when you're in the test interface?
Okay, so the question was when you are, looking at an interface and you're testing it, is there any plans to have the local variable values shown to you? This is another one that we know is a big problem. So it's something that we want to do. We don't have any like immediate timeline for it or anything like that, but that's definitely something that we're looking at in terms of improving the interface design experience, because we know it's really hard to debug when you can't see the values of your local variables. Yeah.
Will the presentation be available afterwards so I can pass to the interface again?
Yes, the presentation will be available afterwards along with the rest of the presentations in PDF format.
Okay.
Where would we find those?
Yeah, I believe all of the presentations are available, I think, through the Appian World app, if I remember correctly. So they should all be there in PDF form, so you can download all that. Yes.
You said you improved some of the in-browser rendering for complex interfaces, so that sometimes when you have a really complex interface, it isn't trying to render that as quickly, and you increase that time. Has there ever been a discussion to maybe turn that off when you're working on a really complex interface?
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, if I may paraphrase, is in the interface designer, since we made the live view evaluate less often, have we considered actually just turning off evaluations of the live view? It is something we've considered. We've been kind of balancing the benefits of being able to see your updates live with the performance of evaluating expressions, a lot. So we're kind of trying this as a first step to evaluate it less often and see if that gives you all the performance gains that you really need without actually having you toggle on and off, so that you can actually make a change and then you have to toggle it back on to test it and see that it works and all that kind of stuff. We do want to minimize that. But this is a step towards, improving that performance and making you more productive as you test and, build your interface. So we'll be continuing to look at it and see if what we have in now is sufficient, and, we'll keep looking at that as we go forward. Yeah. Yes?
So when you said that there's unlimited columns that you're going to accommodate in something like pivot, so that means that you guys are going to provide examples solver and vectors solver?
So the question was about the infinite columns, as Matt mentioned earlier this morning, and what changes will there be for scrolling. So horizontally, your content will still fit on the screen that you're using. If you're looking at a really big monitor, then the columns will be evenly divided in that space. If you're looking at a regular laptop, those columns will shrink down a little bit, text will wrap. In 17.1, you may have noticed that the interfaces in sites are responsive, so that if you are looking at your site on a mobile browser, on a tablet, then that small screen will trigger some collapsing behavior, and then on a phone even more, to give you the best experience. So in that situation, on a smaller tablet or phone screen, columns will just stack. So you won't need a horizontal scroll bar. It'll just intelligently stack, so you can still see all of your content and it won't be squeezed down. But bigger than that, on a big screen, if you use 20 columns, then it should be for an interface that really has a small amount of content in each one. So we didn't put a cap on the number of columns, but in practice, as you're designing, choose the right number of columns for the screens you expect your interface to be on. Anything else?
And, and also remember that in sites, you now can control the page width as well. So if you have an interface where you want to use a lot of columns that will be available in a site, then you can consider using, the wide page so that it actually takes up the most amount of space. Any other questions?
All right, we'll take another round of applause for multi-file upload if you want.